My name again is Margie Pfiel, and this is my husband,
Biff, Wideman.
Wideman. And we're going to share this together today. I thought it might be helpful for Biff to say a little bit right here at the beginning about this very first meeting at Laurelville that Marlene Kropp mentioned. Biff was present there, so first-hand account.
Let me just mention that moments ago, Glenn mentioned that this is a semester when Margie is free from teaching, freeing her in part to be here this afternoon. And I'll just say that I'm grateful as well that this is a semester that Margie is free from teaching, and we're delighted to be here. The gathering that Marlene Kropp mentioned occurred in August of 1999 at Laurelville Mennonite Church Center. And as she also mentioned, it was a circle of about 25 folks. And in the invitation that went out to that small circle of people, I was asked, do you feel somehow at home in both traditions, and for that very reason not entirely at home in either? Do you find yourself longing and working for a bridge? And the invitation continued to suggest that what we hoped might happen in that weekend was to share stories, to ask why the Mennonite Catholic Bridge is becoming so heavily traveled, and to explore ways to support one another into the future. My specific memories of that weekend are fairly dim, but I have a very clear sense of how profoundly nourishing the conversation was. As Marlene suggested, it included folks whose marriage partners had grown up in the other tradition. It included folks who had been formed in the Mennonite Church and were feeling drawn toward a more sacramental tradition, and also included folks who had been raised in a Catholic context and found themselves worshiping in Mennonite settings. It had, in many ways, a sense of family reunion, even though this was a family we didn't know, the participants didn't know they had. One of our friends, Pat Shaver, who has been quite active in the Bridgefolk conversation over many years now, reflected on that gathering by saying, the hope was that the gathering would have some of the feel and informality of a family reunion, with time for telling stories and informal chatting. And that's just what it felt like. A time to connect with others who share the experience of living in multiple spiritual homes. So at that point, we had no sense of what might emerge from the conversation, but I think did come away with a deep sense that simply the gathering to speak from the places of the heart about our faith experience and how the Spirit was at work in our lives, moving us to what seemed like this bridge place between Catholic and Mennonite traditions was important.
So we'll just say a little bit more about the background of Bridgefolk from that point, and we want to be sure to allow time for questions, so this won't take very long. So that was 1999, and then both Marlene and Abbot John mentioned what happened in 2001 when they had that initial meeting at St. John's Abbey, and the abbot offered hospitality. And the next thing that happened was the first public annual gathering of Bridgefolk at St. John's Abbey in 2002. And that's where Biff and I met. I was in South Bend, and Biff was pastoring at Fellowship of Hope in Elkhart, but we met in Minnesota at that very first Bridgefolk gathering, the first public gathering. And then from there, on the little handout that we gave you, you'll see that we've been meeting every year since that time, alternating, as Marlene mentioned, after the first 3 years or so, we've been alternating between a Catholic site, usually St. John's or St. Ben's, and then a Mennonite site the following year. So we've been to Eastern Mennonite University, and we've been up to Canada, Conrad Grebel, and to Akron, Pennsylvania, to Laurelville, again, and we're thinking next of Seattle and Winnipeg as possible sites, so that'll be exciting. Branching out. There have also been a number of regional gatherings in areas like ours where we have kind of an epicenter of Catholics and Mennonites interested in each other's traditions. So here locally, we've had regional meetings, not so much in the last couple of years, but about 4 or 5 years ago, we had several. And especially around the time that the document Called Together to be Peacemakers was released, we had a number of regional gatherings to unpack that together. You'll notice on the handout I gave you, alongside Bridgefolk meetings for many years, from 2002 through maybe 2007 or 8, we gathered a group of Mennonite and Catholic theologians. So folks who would be interested in coming to the Bridgefolk meeting, but also having an academic component alongside the official meeting. And we were addressing specific issues in those meetings, especially martyrdom in the years 2003 and 4. And then the 2007 conference, we actually hosted a conference at Notre Dame following right on the heels of Bridgefolk, which was hosted at AMBS. And out of that conference came this book, Sharing Peace, that Gerald Schlabach and I edited. It consists of papers from that conference, and then in the back there's an appendix containing the document Called Together to be Peacemakers. In the article that I gave you, Biff and I wrote that for this little publication. Thanks, Biff. This is called The Sign of Peace, and you can get this online. This is put out by the Catholic Peace Fellowship, which is based in South Bend. It's actually based in our house, on the first floor of our house. So it's very much a mom and pop kind of organization. But it was started by Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day back in the mid-60s. And the purpose of the Catholic Peace Fellowship has been to support people who are in the military who are experiencing qualms of conscience and are coming to some crystallization of conscience and need support to be able to discern and possibly leave the military. So that work continues today in a very humble way. But you can go to their website and you can access their publications. And the little piece that you have comes from an issue on Mennonites and Catholics being in conversation. So that came out in 2010. And just one last little thing here, common practices. The annual conferences take on different themes, and I've listed a series of themes that we came up with as members of Bridgefolk, common practices that we thought Mennonites and Catholics seemed to share. And You see them here. So from 2010 to 14, our conference is very intentionally focused on one or more of these themes of nonviolence. I think we talked about that last week, and then it came up too in Marlene and Abidjan's reflections. Silence and prayer. So I think we've heard a lot of that today. The experience of oblates, of Jep and Joyce and Glenn and Marilyn praying the Liturgy of the Hours, of Judith as well as an oblate, and Carol Nichols' experience. Simplicity and hospitality. I think every year really somehow those two themes come back around as commonalities that we share. Forgiveness. So thinking especially about the treatment of the meaning of martyrdom and what it means to come to terms with our histories as Mennonites and Catholics. And I would say, as I said last week too, as a Catholic, just becoming aware of what happened around the time of the Reformation was a revelation for me. That's not something that was ever taught in any Catholic school that I've attended, unfortunately. And so that's something that it's a huge growth area, I would say, for Catholics who come to Bridgefolk. That's one of the biggest learnings and one of the necessary steps, I think, to really authentic ecumenical dialogue between Mennonites and Catholics. Common worship, I have there just a little note, the special place of foot washing. Marlene mentioned that our gatherings every year have become kind of ritualized. We always have a hymn sing followed by an ice cream social. And we also always have foot washing. And as you all know, the place of foot washing in John's Gospel is where the Eucharistic narrative is in the Synoptics. And that's been very important because gathering as members of Bridgefolk, as Marlene alluded to, we've had to really come to grips with the pain of being divided around the Eucharistic table. It's not easy. And I think I'm very, very happy to hear of the experience of Eucharistic hospitality that you all shared at Collegeville. And I wish there were more of that. But the truth is that in most Catholic communities, the norm is still the expectation that someone would be in full communion with the Catholic Church in order to receive. And that feels very exclusive because it is. And as Bridgefolk, year after year, we've had to come to terms with that. And it is true that many Mennonites who participate in Bridgefolk and go to St. John's choose to receive. It is always the case at the end of the day. I mentioned last week the importance of conscience in the Catholic tradition. It's always the case that at the end of the day that it's up to each person in conscience to discern in their hearts whether they are prepared to receive Eucharist. And if the answer is yes, nobody can say no. And I would leave you with that. That's the way that the monks at St. John's explain it. And I appreciate the gentleness and the truthfulness of that explanation. Nevertheless, as Bridgefolk, because what we're about is ecumenical dialogue, we've had to really grapple with the theology behind our divisions. And we've gone through unbelievable intellectual and theological somersaults to try to find ways forward. One of them included this practice called the double Eucharist that we undertook for, I think, about 3 years together. We gave that a try, and it was something that Margaret O'Gara, who has died recently in recent years from cancer, but Margaret was a Catholic theologian in Toronto and very active in not just Mennonite Catholic ecumenical dialogue, but also other ecumenical dialogue processes. And in one of those, she became aware of this, or participated in this, what was known as the double Eucharist. So having Eucharistic practice side by side. So a Mennonite and a Catholic presider entering together and going through Scripture together. And there would be 2 sermons, and then 2 practices around the table. And then each Mennonites and Catholics would each receive in their respective traditions. Yeah, we, unfortunately, Margaret died before we could actually practice that. So we chose to take up the practice because it was so close to her heart. And after the 3rd time, we made a decision not to try it again because it was just too difficult. Instead of being an experience of greater unity, it served to highlight the division around the table. So now we're back to just recognizing the truth of where our institutions are. I think one of the lessons from the healing story of this year's Bridgefolk Conference is, as Abbot John said, you know, God's Spirit has a way of transcending the institutional divisions that we find ourselves stuck with at a given point in history. God is much bigger than these institutions. And we're living into that together. Always, though, with a foot planted in the reality that we actually inhabit. And so Biff and I, Glenn mentioned, we won't say a lot about our marriage, but one relevant thing is we participate in what we call the liturgical doubleheader every Sunday. We go to St. Augustine's Catholic Church in South Bend, and they have an 8:15 Mass, which gets out at 9:15 usually. And then we get right over to Kern Road for the 9:30 service at Kern Road. And that's our liturgical doubleheader. We're both baseball fans. And, you know, that's, I think, week in and week out, I feel very welcome at the table at Kern Road. But after a couple of years in Bridgefolk, I realized I needed to choose not to participate because of the practice of my own tradition, which has excluded people from the table. I have to do that to be honest about the reality that we inhabit. But I feel very, very welcome there. And not seldom has someone said to me, I should say often people have said, well, you know, you'd be welcome to join us. You could become Mennonite, because I've said how attracted I am to the Mennonite tradition. And I am aware of that. So I think we're very much on the bridge. And Biff, is there anything else that you'd want to add?
Just a couple of things. One, that it's not uncommon for longtime friends to inquire, well, have you become Catholic? Or, you know, what's it like, you know, what's it been like for you to be in relationship to Margie? Or, and something I've realized, you know, as is true in any marriage, there are plenty of things to negotiate. Temperament, cultural experience, past life experience. But I realize that we don't do much negotiating theologically, I don't think. You know, I mean, I think we have a pretty profound sense of all that we share in terms, and that in part has been born out of the richness of the Bridgefolk conversation, in which we've now participated for a dozen years and better. I'd also like to just share a few words from Ivan Kaufman that Gerald Schlebach included in a very touching remembrance of Ivan at the Bridgefolk gathering this summer. Ivan wrote, "The Bible is filled with miracle stories, things which everyone agreed could not happen, but which happened anyway. If that is how we define the word miracle, then events of the past 50 years have been a steady succession of miracles, which have brought Mennonites and Catholics into conversations which once seemed impossible. And that certainly has been true of I think, our experience of Bridgefolk, that it seems that the conversation has just been very life-giving and fruitful for those who participate, and increasingly my sense is that in every gesture of friendship, of sincere conversation, of sharing together in mission, in prayer together, in every gesture of ecumenical friendship, we are being drawn together in the heart of God, and that's a unity that is very real and palpable. And that doesn't mean that we are unaware of the places of separation between our traditions, but I think our intention has been to look beyond those fences or slip under them, or continuing to look for ways to share gifts between our traditions.
Gosh, you know, we better allow a little time for questions. Sorry, Glenn, we went on and on again. But are there any questions that people might have?
What does it mean to, I've heard here and other places, proceeding in friendship. What does that mean?
So early on in Bridgefolk, we had a visitor from the Sant'Egidio community based in Rome, dedicated to service and peacemaking, and it's also an ecumenical community. And one of their leaders who participated with us said in response to a question, well, what advice would you have for us? He said, well, proceed through friendship. And so that's what we've been trying to do. Yeah.
Yes.
I would like to ask the question about each one of your families, brothers, sisters, and if, I don't know if you have children, you don't. But if you were to have children, what do you advise that child concerning your friendship and your faith and so on? Also, another question that I would like to ask is, besides the Mennonites, are there other evangelical groups like Methodists, Presbyterians that are tied to join together with the Catholic in this way?
There you go. What are you going to do about your children?
It's not a question that we've had to face, but I know for other younger couples in the Bridgefolk movement who are, you know, Mennonite and Catholic, that is something that they have had to address, and there's no one right way to do that. I think it just depends on their own discernment. We did have one baby blessing as Bridgefolk. A baby had just been born, and they brought their infant with them to the conference, and we gathered around, and Marlene and Abbot John together led a blessing of that child, and that was very meaningful. Again, these liturgical rituals that have the capacity to bridge rather than divide are something that we've tried to find room for. Yeah, our families, I mentioned last week that I'm a cradle Catholic like Joellen, but my father had been Methodist, and this gets to your question. Back when they married in 1944, my father had to promise to raise all of his children as Catholics, and he himself eventually became Catholic after the 5th child was born. I guess he just realized which way this was going, but he took that very seriously, and to the point that my brother wanted to go to a public high school, and my father made him go to a Catholic high school, which probably in the end wasn't the best for him, but that was part of the commitment that he had made, and he really lived by that. I think now there is more latitude and more room for discussion. And Biff, you might have more to say from your own background about other ecumenical combinations.
Not so much that, but I will mention that in the last couple of years, one of the participants in our yearly gathering has been a woman who is at a bridge place between the Presbyterian Church of her upbringing and the Catholic Church, and she has been drawn to the Bridgefolk congregation, I think because of identifying with being in that kind of bridge place between traditions. I'm not aware of sort of similar grassroots ongoing conversations, but I hope they're happening.
Well, I think we need one quick question, maybe. Quick. Short. Yes, go ahead.
It's a comment on Bridgefolk. As being a regular Bridgefolker, I think that, I'm Mary Lane Yoder, I think that Ivan's words about the miracle of this and what we live into at each Bridgefolk gathering is marvelous, and that's true. And the other side, that the pain that continues to be carried around the table, that's also true. And these don't cancel each other out. And in my own life, where I continue to see remarkable and amazing things happening, and I see things that can't be fixed, or at least not right now. And so to live with the pain and to bear that and to understand that that's part of my calling as a person of faith, both to witness the miracle and to live with the pain, that has been an extraordinary gift of the Bridgefolk community. So, no question, a word of witness.
Thank you, Mary. That just highlights what it would have been like for us at Collegeville if we had we didn't live with that pain because we felt full acceptance, and there's a huge difference. I think maybe the key word here as we leave today is proceed through friendship. That just seems like a wonderful motto to live by and how to relate to folks in other ways. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.